I once heard it said that a happy family is an early heaven. I hope the opposite is not true, and that's that an unhappy family is, well, you know what that would possibly be. However, I know in many families there is unhappiness and there is not a sense of balance. And we always have to ask, well, why is there not that balance? Why is it that some families seem to have things together, maybe others do not? Well, I will say that something I've learned over the years is every family is different. Every family is different. Even the way that we define family today, you might be a family of 18, you might be a family of 1. You might be somewhere in the middle or in between. But I will tell you that every family and the dynamics of family are different. We don't know what's going on in another household. You never know. You may think you know your neighbors or your friends or your relatives and what goes on in that household, but really that's something that is sacred. It is a gift. It is unique to every home. Again, whether you have a large family or you're alone, you're still a family. And your household is something precious. It is something that is sacred. It is something that you determine and control what comes in and what goes out. You determine and you control what the conversation is. You determine and you control how much presence of God there is in that particular home. So it's really a great gift that God gives us in order to have a household, to be able to have a family. Our family of origin says so much about us. Again, as I'm getting older, I realize that more and more, that I was the youngest child, I was my parents' favorite, I was probably spoiled as well, and I would tell them that. But you know what? I realize that it kind of, a lot of the ways that I make decisions, I go back to thinking about my family, about growing up, and about how we interacted together. And really, I look back and I think our family was hardly perfect. But I didn't know that. Growing up, I thought it was pretty darn good, and I'm glad that it was, and I thank God for that. When I look back on my own personal family experience, the place that I most often go to is our kitchen table. It is the kitchen table. We had an oval kitchen table, very 1960s. It had metal wrought iron base and very intricate. We painted it quite a bit over the years, the metal. The top was a nice, like, kind of countertop. And really, I just remembered that table because a lot of discussions happened at that table. I think that that table was the place where my parents learned how to be parents and where we as children knew what it meant to be children. And I hope that for families today, that you know what your kitchen table looks like. It's not just a serving counter. It's not going through the drive-through at McDonald's. But the kitchen table is critical because that is where discussions take place. It's where the cell phones do not belong. I assure you, I'm not against technology by any stretch. But recently I heard a statistic that on average, people spend 2.5 hours a day on their cell phone. Think about that. 7 times 2.5 is 17.5 hours a week. That's like a part-time job that you're wasting on that cell phone. You could be out making money or contributing to the household with that. Just think of how much time is spent. Time is precious. And when that time is spent in that nucleus around that table, parents can know how to be parents and children can learn how to be children, because that discussion and that presence, it is critical for the life, for the cell of the family to be able to be healthy, for to be able to grow, to be able to have God's grace come upon them. Our readings today speak also about parents and children. In the first reading, we hear from Samuel about how Hannah took Samuel and basically dedicated him to the Lord. You know, really, that's a lesson in parenting. We do not own our children. Children are gifts from God. And children are going to have unique personalities and unique ways, and certainly everyone is going to be different, and we have to realize that. But when we give our children to God, we say, Lord, I'm just a caretaker of this child. I'm here to give good example. I'm here to teach them right from wrong. Because you see, that's probably the best gift that a parent can give to their child. is the gift of a conscience. It is the gift of knowing right from wrong, so that when they leave the nest, when they go off to college, you don't have to worry about them as much, because you know you've given them that ability of knowing right and wrong, of knowing the gift of God in their life. And that comes from dedicating the children, grandchildren, to God. Saying, Lord, I can only do so much. I cannot control my child. As much as you want to be a helicopter parent and make demands upon them, guess what? They belong to God. We have to allow God to work through that child, to develop their gifts and talents, to be able to be the people that God has called them to be. Our second reading from St. John talks about being children. What is a child of God? A child of God is one who just falls into God's arms, who knows how to be loved by God and then share that love. That is a huge opportunity for every person to be able to receive love from God as a child, meaning that we are obedient to Him, meaning that we listen to Him, meaning that we give our lives back to God. We realize where all of our blessings have come from because they come only from Him. He is the great provider. God is the great protector. God is the giver of all life, human and divine. And when we realize that we are His children, just think of the incredible inheritance that we have as disciples, as His sons and daughters, that God gives us so much, including His only Son, not only during the season of Christmas, but always. The gospel talks about a real family situation. Yes, the Holy Family was a real family. We may put them up on a pedestal, but look at what they had to deal with. They dealt with an unexpected pregnancy. They had to leave their home and go to a foreign land because of oppression and abuse of power. They had lost their child at the age of 12. This was after like 3 days. You might be sitting there saying, well, wasn't Mary like on it there? I mean, what happened that he was gone for 3 days? They didn't know where he was. They were a normal family. It was a normal process they figured he was with the family behind them, but then they realized, well, he's not there, and there was no way for them to get in touch with him either. So they went all the way back, and where do they find Jesus? In his Father's house. They find him there teaching with this wisdom. But it says how Mary had anxiety. Son, we've been looking for you with great anxiety. This is real life. So we can look to the Holy Family for inspiration. We can look to the Holy Family for that gift of wisdom. The Holy Family, as St. John Paul II said, is the beginning of countless other holy families. Yes, they were a holy family, but so can your family be a holy family. That when you are a holy family, we know that God is in charge. I once heard it said again about the kitchen table, that the family is like a kitchen table. Each person is one of the legs. And as time goes on, you might lose one of the legs might break, but remember that there's always an extra leg there for God, because ultimately He is the one that holds that table up. God is the one that is able to give stability and an equilibrium to a family, to a household. So parents have to know how to be parents. Children can learn how to be children. And we can pray and invite God into our home. Some families say, Father, I'd like for our family to be more holy. What can we do? Well, I assure you, it starts with prayer. It starts when you sit down for a meal, whether you are at your home, whether you are in the car eating through the drive-thru, whether you are out at a restaurant. It's to not be afraid to say a prayer before meals. That is a great witness that we can give. That is who we are. And it's by looking around your table and saying, where is God here? And if you don't find him there, then invite him in. Do not be afraid. Ask and you will receive. Knock and the door will be opened. Today is a good day to pray for the people in our family, to think about each one. Think about each person in your immediate family or the family that you grew up in, and think of one quality that each person has. What is one divine good quality that each person has? Because I assure you, in the fit of rage or when patience is thrown out the window, you might be reminded with that person of what that good quality is. Remember, God has given each one of us something so special, something so good, and part of that comes from being in the family. There's a story about a boy, he was about 6 years old, and every night he would go and he would sit by his bedside and kneel down, and then he would pray. And he said the usual prayer, "Now I lay me down to sleep. I pray the Lord my soul to keep." And his dad would often go in with him to say the prayer. And on this one particular night, he said his usual prayer, and Dad was right there next to him. And the boy said his prayer, "Now I lay me down to sleep. I pray the Lord my soul to keep." And then he added something. He said, dear Jesus, I want to grow up to be good and strong like my dad." And then the dad, he was a little taken back. He said, "Well, good night, son." The kid went right to sleep. And then the dad knelt down by the bedside, and he said, "Dear Jesus, help me to be good and strong like my son thinks that I am." On this day, let us ask God. We come before him asking for holiness, not just for ourselves, but for our family, that we can be the people, not always that we want to be, but to ask him for help, to be the people that he wants us to be. And when we do that, then perhaps we can enjoy the gift of a happy family. And when there is a happy family, we can have a little taste of an early heaven.